No, I think you're right. I think kids should be debating those issues. I do too. They're healthy for them.
I don't know what other schools are playing. Memo said, or is the letter said.
Lord said, let there be light. Lord said, let there be light.
They didn't really say why, you know, why they're next on the, yeah. I don't know if they just made, if they.
Okay.
Form letter, you could tell it was.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order.
All right,
Go
sir.
ahead, Mr.
All right, sir. Well, tonight is our second of 2 scheduled budget work sessions. And last week, we covered operations for the most part. And tonight, our intention was to cover capital projects. We're happy to try to answer any questions you have about the budget. And then if you note any changes tonight, then we will incorporate them, as well as the one change that you indicated to us last week, which was add $4,000 into the police department budget. And then we'll have, the intention is to have the entire budget on your September 19th agenda. And remember, our next meeting is on Wednesday, September 19th, for adoption prior to the beginning of the fiscal year on October 1st. So what we typically do at this work session is we begin, we kind of go through the capital project narrative, which begins on page 207 of your budget. We kind of go through it item by item. Our intention tonight is to try to keep things moving along as best we can. So what we're planning on doing is discussing projects which you haven't seen before. But if there are projects in here which are recurring each year or which are fairly routine, then we may just ask you at the end of the section if you have any questions about any of the items that you see here in the budget. But please feel free to stop us at any time if you have any questions about any item. So the first thing I just would note is that we do include projects from the general fund here in this section. The projects which are included are projects which are between $5,000 and $10,000. So over $5,000, we call that a capital project, but if it's under $10,000, then we fund it out of the general fund rather than the gaming fund. So there are a number of projects listed here under general fund, buildings and grounds projects of various kinds, some in fire and some in police, all of which you might have noticed last week, and we even talked about a little bit last week. So I'll just begin by asking if you have any questions about any of the projects which are shown under general fund on page 207, 208, or the first project on page 209. If not, we'll go ahead and go to the Convention and Tourism Fund. And we do, as a reminder, we do capital projects out of a number of different funds, and Convention and Tourism covers both some operational issues and also some capital projects. And I will begin by asking Sarah Copeland to talk about the Armour Road Complete Street project.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So the Armour Road Complete Street implementation plan you adopted last November, and it contained a vision for improvements to Armour Road from Ozark all the way west to Burlington. But what we're focusing on right now are what we called the transition and commercial zones of that project from Fayette to Ozark. We had budgeted in this year's budget a total of $480,000 to do the first phase of improvements, so from Fayette to Ozark, to add bike lanes on Armour Road. This would also include new parallel parking from Fayette to roughly Quick Trip between Knox and Lynn, improved crossings across Armour Road, and some improvements at our major intersections. In phase 1, those were really only at Iron. We opened bids last Thursday, and our bids came in very high for this project. Looking over the bids with the engineer, we think that partly this is about the timing of the bids, opening them at the end of the construction season. And we think there might have only been one subconsultant that all 3 of the bidders were using for the micropave part of the project. There were other things in there that were a little strange. We had a very wide you know, our low bid was, and our high bid were separated by $108,000. So we are intending to rebid this project in the spring and do a little work to see if there are things that we can do to make the project a little easier for the bidders. So what we're proposing for the budget next year is actually not what is in the budget document in front of you. What we would propose to do is push back phase 1 to next year and bring you a budget amendment for that amount that we're thinking right now is $450,000. And we'll see how our bids look. And then pushing back phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4, which are shown in here for 2019, 2020, and 2021, a year back in each of those. So our first phase of construction would happen in 2019. And we are very hopeful that if we rebid this in February or March, at the beginning of a new construction season, that we would get better bids, and hopefully more bids as well. Are there questions about that I could answer at this point?
So you would start actually construction, you said, in 2019, next year then?
Yes, but it would be phase 1 construction.
Phase 1.
What we had planned for this year, in which we had hoped to have encumbered at your next meeting, but you know, the bids are really too high for us to feel comfortable moving forward.
But some money that was in this budget will roll over for the next year then?
No, we aren't able to encumber it. You have to encumber money to a specific vendor. Since we're intending to rebid it, we would
you
have to
can't
come
encumber.
back to you for a budget amendment
Okay, I understand.
to make that part of next year's budget.
Kind of like a rollover, but as Sarah says, we can't actually roll over funds unless we have an encumbrance.
Right.
So.
Okay.
In your opinion, in other words, it was just because it was so late in the season that they really didn't want to bid on it, or are there things included in it that are that expensive?
Well, we sure didn't think so. We had a number of the items included in the bid come in very high. The biggest part of it was that we were calling for a micro pave so that we had fresh pavement to put all of the new markings down on. And that came in, that was probably the item that was the biggest driver in the bids being higher than what we had budgeted. They had talked to some contractors on this, like the one that had done work for the road district. The bids we got were almost twice what the road district had paid for their project. And we think that that's a lot to do with being at the end of the construction season. So there were other things that were also very high. The landscaping came in very high. Some of the pavement markings were much higher than typical, and we're not really sure why that was. But the micropave was a big part of it. If that had come in at the price that the road district had paid for their project, we probably would be awarding a bid.
It is odd that every time the road district that we could do something for about half of what the city is doing, and I guess I don't know why, but it just works out that way. I mean, and plus the fact there's really only one company that does that in the area. There's one out of St. Louis, but when you got one company that has it all, then you okay. I think it's a good idea to roll. I mean, to move on to the next.
There'll be some natural increase in pricing anyway, won't there? Because nothing goes down; it's always going to go up.
Generally, nothing goes down, true, but we're also kind of hoping with a new construction season that there might be somebody who decides that they're going to try to jump into this market and give them some competition.
Is this something we can contract with the road district to do that piece of this work and keep it out of the overall bid?
I don't know about that. One of the things that we want to explore with a little bit more time as we look at, adjusting the project a little bit for new bids is possibly there are a couple of elements in here where it's really acquiring some materials and then installing it. And so we're going to look into whether, and that was also, I mean, a lot of this was high, but we're going to look into whether that's something that we could buy and have public works crews installed to help keep the prices low. We haven't discussed this with Pat yet, so.
He hasn't fainted yet.
Yeah, we want to, we don't want to take things out of the project because eventually it's not what was part of the plan. So we want to look into some alternatives. If we're planning to rebid in February or March, the plans are done. We can really look at those bids and make sure that when we rebid it, we're doing as much as we can to get really good competitive bids and to see if there are ways that we can do some of the work ourselves to help keep the costs down.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Sarah, would you like to move on to the next one, Gateway
Sure.
signage?
So gateway signage, you all approved the gateway signage master plan in 2016, and it had in it a phasing schedule for which signs were going to be constructed in which years. And we immediately ran into a problem with MoDOT because that first sign was at Armour and I-35 in MoDOT right-of-way, and they kind of erected a lot of barriers to moving forward with that. And I don't, if you all remember, a couple of years ago, we discussed whether you would be interested in acquiring excess right-of-way from them so that we could put the sign on, property that we owned, and there was not a lot of interest in doing that at that time. We now believe that there, are other projects happening in that area that we might be able to move forward with that sign in 2019. So finally, without needing to deal with MoDOT. So what's shown in the budget for next year would be the construction and installation of that sign at I-35 and Armour Road. And we've increased the price a little bit from what was in that original plan just to accommodate rising prices. And then we've pushed back the other three in 2020, 2021, and 2022 would be Children's Fountain, 210 in Choteau, and 10th in Burlington in the order that you had approved. So really, the archway kind of jumped to the front of the line and everything's been pushed back a little bit, but we think we'll be moving forward in 2019 with that next gateway sign.
All right, moving on to the next item at the bottom of page 209, rabbit hole parking. So as you know, there is the what's being called the world's first Exploratorium, a museum of children's literature, which is slated to come in at 14th and Knox. Right now, I think the schedule is for September of 2019 is when they're hoping to open. And one of the things that the city committed to when it applied for Missouri Development Finance Board funding for the project was to assist them with finding off-street parking. And the city made a commitment in the amount of $200,000 for this. And what has been discussed, but we haven't gotten anywhere close to doing it yet, is perhaps doing some kind of a long-term lease with the rabbit hole to gradually recoup those funds. That's down the line. So we have been working with one of the co-founders of Rabbit Hole, Pete Cowden, to try to identify and work on with him on to purchase property nearby for off-street parking. And so far that hasn't come to fruition, but that's what this allocation is for in next year's budget. So something should be happening sometime in the next few months, we would hope.
What if we come up and we can't furnish any parking, can't get anybody to turn loose, or? Well,
I guess we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. There are some other possibilities in the area. As you know, we approached Appellant, the company across the street to the north. We've got a parking lot they're not using. It's a pretty nice parking lot. And the hope would have been maybe that they would have come to something, but they responded very quickly that they weren't interested in doing that. But there are some other possibilities in the area which could be pursued. So if in that eventuality, then I guess we'll have to look at what else could be done, because they do need off-street parking. There's no question about that. And we have made a commitment to assist them with that.
Yeah, I think this is a major project that we need to do everything we can. I know we will, but I think this is going to be really a winner for North Kansas City.
Agreed that we need to work with them to get that off-street parking established before they open.
Right.
Yep. All right, moving on then to wayfinding signage.
So wayfinding signage, we had budgeted this as a 2-year project with the first roughly half, 60%, in 2018 and the remainder in 2019. This is a project that we have not gotten the RFP out yet. We intend to select someone who will do the final design for these signs. We have in our signage master plan concept for those, but it's not enough detail for somebody to put it out to bid, for somebody to construct. So what we would intend to do next year is to bring you a budget amendment to do it all at one time. So what's budgeted for next year is $119,501. We would intend to add the additional amount necessary to do all of the signage in one go next year, since we did not get the first part of it done this year. And that would be, you know, the pole-mounted signs directing people to key destinations, City Hall, public parking, the high school, around mainly our downtown area as shown in that sign. And then I also think we included a couple of the small parking lot monument signs as well.
All right, that concludes the Convention and Tourism Fund projects. So moving on to the Gaming Fund, which is the fund that funds most of our capital projects that cover some kind of a general fund department. And I'd like to start by calling on Shirley Land to discuss the business licensing software item on page 211.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Currently, we use Encode software to handle our business licensing, the renewals and tracking, reporting, and it works fine, but it's an accounting software program and mostly accounts for the business licenses. It doesn't allow you to do much more than that, and we're proposing that we use the same type of software that they're using in community development, Intergov, for our business licensing software. Not only would it have enhanced reporting options, it would allow our businesses to renew their licenses online. A lot of them, they're demanding that now, and then they could, we could skip a lot of the paperwork that comes through here and maybe speed up the process a bit. And that is what this is for. It's for the software.
Thank you, Shirley. The other items listed under administration in the gaming fund are all kind of standard ones that we, generally speaking, bring to you every year. Nothing too special about them, so unless you had any questions, we weren't going to go through those. All right, moving on then to buildings and grounds, and I'll call on Kim Nakahoto to discuss the City Hall facelift project.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The City Hall facelift is kind of a multi-year approach to look at some of the assets here at City Hall and either paint or refresh. That can include painting, it can include carpeting, it can include windows. Next year's budget is the restrooms that are right over here, to have those renovated, to bring them into code compliance, make them ADA compatible, and to add children's changing tables to both the male and female restrooms. So that is what is proposed in this budget.
And then, as Kim says, you then will see some other items showing out for the rest of the 5 years in the CIP. The next item is rooftop HVAC units, and I'll turn to Pat Hoffer.
Thank you. The city's in the middle of a multi-year process to replace HVAC rooftop units, commonly known as RTUs, on city buildings. The average life of an RTU is 12 to 15 years. All of the city's units are reaching the end of their useful lives. In fiscal year 2019, the units to be replaced are in the area serving the IT division over there and at the library. The library happens to be a very large, 40-foot long, 60-ton unit. The 5-year plan calls for continuing replacement of rooftop units in 2020, 21, and 22. We spent a lot of money this year. As these are getting older, they're out here a lot. The library went out, had to close down at least 2 times, and it's good that we started this program. Any questions?
Does technology change at all on those where they get a little bit longer life when you put them in? Do they get more efficient and that sort of thing, or do you even know?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. I don't know that, but I do know every year they get more efficient.
Okay.
And sometimes that gets costly, or replacing filters more often and such.
All right, thanks, Pat. The next couple items that are listed on page 212, replacement of a diesel truck and replacement of a van are fairly self-explanatory unless you have any questions. So the next item to talk about is replacing the City Hall concrete drives. And if you were to walk around the north side of the building and the west side of the building, you'll see some pretty badly deteriorated concrete in places. And it's become something that we really should address. And so this project is to replace the concrete to simply address the deterioration that we're seeing on those two sides of City Hall.
Question, Eric.
Yes, sir.
Will that be put out to bid, or will
Oh, yeah.
Musselman Hall do it for us?
I think, my intention would be we'd put that one out to bid.
Okay.
Yeah. Musselman and Hall handles sort of
Sidewalks,
regular,
I didn't-
right,
I didn't know
right.
if
But
they
a
would
discrete
come
capital
together.
project, I think we would probably, yeah, go out to bid for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Will it be the sides where it's bad? Are they going to redo this up front here too, or no?
No, we're really, I'm talking about the north and west sides of City Hall.
Okay.
It is pretty bad over there. Do we have any idea why it's degraded so bad?
Pat?
Yeah, it was a contractor for J.E. Dunn, and immediately it looked like they were pouring in the rain for one thing, but after the first year it was starting to crack. It was just a poor concrete mix.
All right. Well, then the next item in the gaming fund under the community center budget division, the gaming fund does sort of reimburse the community center fund and build its balance up as necessary to have an even balance at the end of the year. So essentially, the YMCA's deficits are covered by the gaming fund as a pass-through through the community center fund. So the amount that we're computing in next year's budget that'll be necessary to balance the community center budget, irrespective of any equipment repairs that might occur, is $355,199. And thereafter, we're projecting a little bit more each year. If you look in your 5-year CIP, we're showing amounts of 500, and then we put an amount in for inflation, 520, 540, and 560. Never know, but it's been around $500,000 or so that the Y has been costing the gaming fund in terms of its operating deficit the last couple of years. So we're kind of figuring out now what we can count on as an amount that we'll need to spend each year.
That's including management fees and everything, correct?
Right. Yes, sir. The other item that we always budget every year is, just in case any are necessary, $100,000 for any major equipment repairs that might occur at the Y. We do have an obligation, according to our operating agreement, to cover those. Haven't had to do that in a while, but usually we get at least a couple for HVAC or boilers or other things like that.
Is there any talk or any advantage or whatever to just sell that to the YMCA?
Well,
They'd have to be willing to buy it, but.
Yeah, we haven't had that discussion with them. It's a 10-year agreement.
Yeah.
I think you would like me to ask, I can, but I think they'll probably be pretty happy with the agreement as it is. Now, I think come the end of this 10-year agreement, we can look at all kinds of different arrangements, but we haven't had any discussions with them about that, to answer your question. We're in about year 5 of that 10-year agreement.
Are they allowed to even own? Being a nonprofit, I'm not sure. I don't know where I heard it, but someone told me that they're not allowed to own
I
buildings.
don't know. I guess I would have assumed that they did own some facilities. I think they're allowed to own, yeah.
I heard
it's-
that from an employee, not somebody high up.
Yeah, I'm doubting that,
Okay.
but I couldn't say for sure. But I'm almost certain that they do own some of their facilities in the Kansas City area. For example, I know that they're working on the old Lyric Theater, and I think they own that.
Yeah, they bought
Yeah.
that.
So, okay, so the next item then, moving on from Community Center, is items in community development, and for those, I'll turn to Sarah.
So in 2016, City Council approved a settlement agreement with Burger King that was when we acquired part of their existing parking lot for the improvements to Taney Street in the redevelopment area. And as part of that agreement, we established our purchase price for the rest of their property right there and the price that they would pay us to acquire the triangular piece on the east side of Vernon. So we are budgeting this amount. We do think we've received a site plan from them, so we do think that we will get this project moving and purchase their, do that land transfer in this 2019 budget year. And that the price that we had agreed to was $1,286,710. The next item is, of course, related, and that would be for the demolition of the existing Burger King structure. We would need to do that after we acquire the property, and we are estimating that for $165,000. Any questions about those two? Then, I'm sorry, yes.
Wasn't the property that Burger King's moving to, weren't they to pay for that?
Yes, we did that. There's a price for that property as well. It was based on the final square footage of the area. I believe that this $1.2 million is just our purchase price. It's not a net amount.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So this is the expenditure. We are not showing here the revenue that we would receive from their purchase of our property.
And we're not sure what that approximate amount would be in revenue.
We do. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. It's less than $1.2 million.
Yeah, it was provided for in the agreement, the real estate agreement that we signed a couple of years ago now, but I'm sorry I don't have that information at my fingertips.
All right, thank you.
There are no other questions about Burger King. The next item is what we've been calling Phase 2B improvements. If you think of the Taney improvements as Phase 1 and the Vernon side as Phase 2, Phase 2 would be once Burger King in its current location is closed and gone, we need to finish extending a water line along the south side of Armour across their existing property. We need to complete the right turn lane taper going into Vernon Road. There's a little piece of it that we're not able to do while their drive-through remains open. We would extend the sidewalk on the west side of their property along Taney and put in the median that's part of Taney Street there. We originally budgeted much more than we now think this project is going to be. The engineer's estimating it at about $250,000, and we have spoken to Clarkson about this amount, and so we feel pretty confident that this is less than we had originally budgeted in the $250,000 range for the completion of those improvements. We can't move forward with those until Burger King has gone because the leaving open their access off of Taney was part of our settlement agreement.
If we start digging in there again south of the Burger King, are we going to run into EPA?
No, none of this project would be south of Burger King. The water line is along the north side. We're not anticipating anything there. And based on all the investigation we've done, we don't think there's any contamination in the areas where we would be doing any excavation.
No.
I have a miscellaneous question about the development. Not specifically related to 2B, but I'm assuming we'd have the same problem in this area. So when you pull into the development, where the bike lanes are, and they're double bike lanes, and they're almost as wide as a car, and I think cars have pulled onto those bike lanes, and so therefore all the, barriers are smashed and on the ground. There's one, I think, per end or whatever. Do you have thoughts on how we can repair that?
Right, so some of that has actually been damaged by our contractor, and so they have to go in and replace them. And they have been holding off on doing that until they're pretty sure they're not going to hit them again.
Okay, that sounds good. But I can see a car doing it, like totally easily.
So, right, so we put those up partly to see, will this be enough to keep people out of there?
No.
And so the idea being, put them up, give us a chance to evaluate, and then decide if we need to do anything further. So I would say at this point, we don't know yet, because then, Clarkson, it's really some of their subs. It's not Clarkson, but
Okay,
some
so
of their
we don't
subs
have
have hit
anything in this
those.
budget for next year
We don't have
to make
anything
any of
in
those
this
improvements.
budget with regards to that, because we don't feel like we've had a chance to really see if they've been an effective deterrent. But yes, we
I'll
will
give you my
definitely-
opinion, but that's okay. I mean, if you want to do it the next year, that's fine. I worry a little bit about it, because they just,
Yeah.
permanently stop them from driving on that,
Right.
on those bike paths, so.
Yeah, so that's kind of a, let's see if these work once the contractors are gone and aren't running them over for us.
Okay, thank you.
The next item here is still related to the redevelopment area. When we did the traffic impact study to evaluate what improvements were necessary, particularly for all of our intersections along Armour Road, one of the things that was included in that was an evaluation of the Walker Road and Armour Road intersection. We were concerned at the time that MoDOT might come back and say you need to make some improvements at Walker Road because it's part of the area of influence of this redevelopment, and they didn't. But our engineers still said to us, there are some things going on at Walker Road that make that intersection not function very well. With those two left turns, one of those lanes goes right into another left turn lane, and so we get a lot of stacking in the right-hand left turn lane on eastbound Armour. People who know that they don't want to make that left turn. And we have a lot of stacking in the evenings, in particular, people southbound on Walker Road waiting to make that right turn onto Armour. So they made some recommendations for improvements to that intersection, to add a second southbound Walker right turn lane onto Armour Road and to reconfigure the alignments of the left turn lanes. So this project would be to make those intersection improvements next year to reduce some of the queuing and stacking that happens at that intersection, particularly in our peak times.
All right. The next item is professional services for the Armour Road redevelopment area. So we, the financial arrangements for the development of Armour Road redevelopment area, 1 North, are really pretty complex. As you know, we bring items to you constantly at council meetings. We've been doing tax increment financing in Chapter 100, and there are other financial instruments that are being worked on, all of which have to be interwoven together, and all of which require a fair amount of work by our financial consultants and from special legal counsel. And until now, we have been able to absorb those costs in the project budget, because the project budget has been in the millions of dollars each year, and we have managed to spend less, in some cases, on some of the construction work than had been budgeted, and therefore able to absorb those professional services. But we're about done with capital projects now, as you can see, in the Armour Road redevelopment area, and so there's no capital budget, there's no project budget to absorb professional services costs, but we're going to continue to have professional services costs as we work to bring in all of the various component developers, and they each bring their different kinds of financing along with them. And so because of that, I have budgeted what I hope will be too much, but you never know, money for financial and legal services, all pertaining to the continuing development of the Armour Road area. Okay. Sarah, back to you for the city-initiated demolition fund.
This is not Armour Road redevelopment area related. Moving on. It is pretty typical for community development departments where you deal with property that is new and being built, and also property that's on the decline, to budget some amount of money for situations where the city has to step in and board up a structure or do some demolition work. I think we've been atypical in the last 5 years, and we've gotten away with not doing much of that, and we haven't done any demos ourselves in the last 5 years. But particularly in this last year, there have been several properties that we have been monitoring because we have concerns about getting to that point. We haven't quite yet, but there is a structure that I'm worried that we might need to step in and demolish because it's unsafe and the property owner has not taken any action. So this would set up a fund for us to pay for that work if it was necessary. And we would anticipate budgeting this on an ongoing basis. It's certainly a line item I hope that we don't have to use, but if we did get to that point, we would have some resources available to us to take that work on.
Question, Mr. Clevenger?
So as far as this, if we have to demolition a property that is unsafe or whatever, is a lien put on that property for the cost that we had to pay to demolish the structure?
If we were to do that, yes, we would do it. There is a process that you go through in order to put a lien on the property to hopefully recoup your costs down the road. My understanding from talking to people is that you are still not always successful in doing
Sure.
that, but that would be our intent.
Okay.
How long is the building allowed to be boarded up?
Well, it really depends on whether you can have a building that's boarded up for quite a while. The key is whether then it is declared dangerous. And you can board up a building, but it's not dangerous. So we would rather not demolish anything. There are a variety of reasons for that. So if a property is boarded, but not dangerous, it could be boarded up for quite a while. This really, and sometimes we do board up property, and then we don't need to take any further action for a while. If we were to do demolition, it's really after we've declared a building to be dangerous, and there is, a process for doing that, and we're still not seeing any improvement in its condition.
See, you budgeted $10,000. I wonder if that's enough in the budget because Burger King's $165,000.
Right.
And that's
so,
a pretty small building.
We anticipate that this would be about enough for us to do one smaller residential demolition. And again, we would hope not to have to do that. We would prefer to board something if necessary and let the property owner deal with it down the road. So it might be that we have a situation where we have to come back to you and say we had to do a demolition for this dangerous structure. $10,000 was not enough and we need to do a budget amendment. But I think it's probably more likely that we never get above this. I mean, in 5 years, we have not done any demolition at all.
Is this in my ward?
It might be.
Our ward. You can have it if it's something like that. It was almost not my block because they're fixing that house.
No.
Oh. I won't drill you anymore. But you know the house I'm talking about. They are putting a foundation under it.
We were worried about, it was on our list of one of the ones we were worried about.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
So if you look in the 5-year CIP, you'll see $10,000 a year budgeted for this. I'd like maybe to build that up a little bit. So if, for example, we didn't spend any money in fiscal year 19, I might come back to you with a $20,000 proposal in 2020 to get that up to a certain amount, which would be sufficient, we would hope, to cover any demolition. Yes, right. But we're just starting small.
I can see if it's residential, most of the ones in our ward could probably be pretty small. I'd tear it down for $10,000. I'll tear Burger King down for that.
We'll look forward to getting your bid.
All right, Sarah, moving on to the downtown streetscape improvement.
Okay. We had, Pat and I had come and talked to you several years ago about refreshing our downtown streetscape. And then in all of the other projects we had going on, that one never moved forward. So this is the year we're finally going to get this one moving forward. And our intent is to not to make major changes downtown, but to address the pavers there. Some of them are eroding from the bottom up. And so we'll probably part ways with the pavers. Some of our street trees, if you look up at the tops of the crowns, you can tell which ones are in really bad shape. They're reaching the end of their lifespan and need to be replaced. So this is just really a refresh. The irrigation in our landscaping beds, a lot of it is broken and needs to be replaced. We anticipate doing this as kind of a hybrid between a design bid build and a design build, where we would work with a landscape architect on some design documents that then we could put out and find a contractor to work with us in finishing up the plans for that, and then to start doing the work, and that we would phase this work over several years. So we're doing more or less a block at a time. That kind of keeps the entire downtown from being under construction at one time, but also kind of spreads out the pain a little bit over time. But this is our intent for next year, is to get somebody to help us work through the design issues, find a contractor to work with us on getting started, and then get a first block done and refreshed and looking nice. We did increase the cost in the budget from what we had thought a couple of years ago, with the idea that we probably also need to look at our lighting downtown. You know, some of those poles, while they're not structurally unsound, they are starting to crumble. They're not very attractive to see, you know, some of that aggregate chipping off, and we don't have a lot of stored replacements for those, and they're no longer being manufactured.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to ask if you were going to try to coordinate this with the wayfinding project?
A little bit. Our hope is that the wayfinding, because those are individual new pole mounted, that we could take those down if they were put up in a block that was under construction. We would probably try to avoid that first block, and we don't know which first block would be yet. But yes, to the extent that we can. But we also would like to make sure that when we get, you know, because if we're anticipating this over several years, that when we get to a block that would have wayfinding signage, we could remove the pole and store it and then bring it and set it back.
Okay.
Was that initially, are those trees and everything, was that initially irrigated and it's all quit now, or?
Not all of the trees were irrigated. In fact, that's how we first started thinking about this project. Some of those tree wells aren't really very big, and so expanding those some in size could help new trees last longer and be healthier. But the corners where we have those bigger landscaping beds, those are irrigated.
Yeah. Are they working now, or?
Yeah, they're working. We haven't had to use them the last couple of weeks, but.
Well, no. Okay.
I just want to call the council's attention to the fact that this is really a very significant 4-year project, of which this is really just the first year. So if you look in your 5-year CIP on page 232 under downtown streetscape, it actually shows over the next 4 years we are proposing, or will be proposing, $567,000 next year. In 2020, $487,000, and in 2021, $974,000, and again, that same amount in 2022, for a total of just a little over $3 million. So I just want council to keep that in mind as we embark on this process, that it is an expensive, we think, necessary, and it'll be very beneficial when done, but 4-year, multi-year project, you know, costing a significant amount of dollars to make improvements downtown.
One more. The Armor Road Complete Street, that was all inside the curb, though, wasn't it? Most of it?
It's all in the street,
Yeah,
yes,
so it's already-
with the exception of some where we needed to install ramps for ADA.
Okay.
Now, could downtown streetscape improvements be a project that's convention and tourism?
It could be, maybe, but we don't have but so much money in convention and tourism.
Right, yeah, if you had.
Yeah, we're if you look at the 5-year plan for convention and tourism, we're not doing as well in that fund, nor would you expect we would be as we are in gaming.
Yeah.
So. All right, the next item listed is Hillside litigation. You all did receive a private briefing about that not too long ago, so you're familiar with that, and just to cover legal expenses that we do anticipate may come up next year, we have budgeted the amount of $50,000. Okay. Sarah, I have myself down for the next item, but I think it's really yours.
Bicycle Master Plan. You all approved a resolution supporting our application to the Planning Sustainable Places grant program run by Mark. We We scored very well and are anticipating receiving all $58,000 that we requested, and that should be finalized this month by the MARC board. The $25,000 in the budget for next year is our match amount. And so that and our grant funds will make up the total budget for that project for next year. We anticipate going through the RFP process with MARC this fall and hopefully getting started with a consultant in January of 2019. This is a project where MARC holds the contract and does all of the administrative work, and our $25,000 is basically we write a check to MARC, and then they do all of the administration from there.
Okay. And then the last item under community development is the Purina Mill demolition. I think we're all familiar with that, and the fact that we do have litigation going on right now to try to see if we can't hold the original owner responsible for the condition of that and for its mitigation. But in the event that that isn't successful, we do have an amount budgeted to take that structure down. We've been budgeting this every year for years, and it hasn't happened yet, but we continue doing that in the event that it's necessary.
Where did we come up with this figure?
That's what I was.
Well, honestly, it had been about $3 million a year, and after a while, we bumped that up to $4 million. I think we did do an estimate a couple of years ago, Sarah, and I think $4 million was about what seemed like that was about the right amount. That
It was 3 point something, and I forget what the something was. But we did get an estimate for it a couple of years ago from Harvey Brothers.
You know, I see a lot of problems with that demolition. The railroad never cooperates with anything.
And really, that's why the estimate is so high.
Right. We can't simply dynamite it. We can't just take a wrecking ball to it. It'll have to come down piece by piece.
Are you going to dump?
And I don't want that contract.
I was going to ask you.
Yeah, you don't want this contract? That's what I was wondering. You do it for $3.5 million?
All right.
One more thing.
Yes,
on
sir.
it. Are we getting any closer to where it would be a dangerous building to where somebody's going to get hurt? Or?
It's already a dangerous building.
I know,
We held that dangerous building hearing in 2014, and we've declared every structure on that property to be dangerous. And it has been posted by the fire marshal several times, in fact. This past year, we actually ordered metal signs, and Public Works took them out and drove them into the ground at the entrances to the property because we'd had several postings that had been removed by unknown persons. So yeah, every structure out there is dangerous, and no one should be entering that property. And if we find people out there, they can be arrested.
Yeah, but what if some idiot gets out there and something falls on them, and then it's our fault?
Well, they can be arrested for violating an order of the fire marshal to stay off of the property.
It is posted,
Yeah, it's
and we
posted
believe that
pretty well.
provides us legal protection.
Does that cover us on our
Yes.
liability, though?
We regret that some people disregard the lawful instructions, but we don't believe that the building is in imminent danger of collapse. And so if we did, I'd be coming to you and saying we have to take it down now. We don't believe that's the case, but we do need people to stay off that property. Yeah. One thing that I want to do tonight is just, in addition to next year's projects, just maybe in some cases anyway, note ones that might either be very significant in 2020 or of some interest. So I'd like to just ask Sarah to touch on a couple of projects which are showing in 2020, which are not listed in the narrative, but which are in the CIP, those being 16th Avenue bicycle lanes and Burlington improvements.
The 16th Avenue bicycle lanes was something that was raised by the road district when they started planning for the replacement of the curb and gutter on 16th Avenue. And so we plan for 2020 to do that project, and this would be a small amount of money for doing the engineering, the construction documents for where those would be installed, and then primarily striping that road to add the bike lanes, probably some of the same kind of not
Posts.
bollards, but little flexible posts, delineator posts at corners.
Not too flexible. But yeah.
to help people see where they need to stay out. So we would anticipate doing that in 2020. That would primarily be from, just on the east side of the I-35 overpass towards Swift. The road gets a little tighter when you get in that block east of Swift because there is some on-street parking, but we would try to get at least to Swift with those where they would meet up with the existing Sharrows. But we'll see if we can make that work all the way out to Burlington to meet up with the Burlington cycle track. But that's not next year, that would be a 2020 project. Yes, sir.
I believe, you've got the path coming down there to it, and we're trying to get the road done, which it will be done probably with this next month. And we're gonna temporarily mark it, but I'd hate to see it sit there a whole year without marking on it.
Do you think we should do that sooner?
If you'd like us to move forward more quickly with that, we can.
Well, don't you think it would be wise?
I would be happy to move forward with it, if that's your direction.
She thinks it would be wise.
Yes.
All right, so would
Yeah,
you
I
like
mean,
us to move this into 2019?
Yeah, the road district has busted their rump, trying to get it done.
Have some nice fresh pavement.
And I would like to see,
Don't mess it up with contractors.
we
All
could,
right.
we could stripe it,
I think that should be done, yeah.
All right, well, we
Let's
will
move
then
it-
shift
move it
this,
up.
on the budget that's presented to you on September 19th, we'll shift this project into fiscal year 2019. All right.
The other one, I'm pretty sure you don't want to shift. So what we're showing for Burlington Improvements Phase 1, this is in 2020. This would be the phase 1 improvements for construction on Burlington. This would be planned for the east side of Burlington to include the cycle track as well as other improvements, but the big thing would be adding that cycle track. I'm not going to get too much into the details here because on October 23rd, that work session, we do plan to really get into those details about the budget and the phasing, not just for phase 1, but the other phases over time. But I just wanted to point out that that is year after next. It seemed much further away when we adopted this plan back in 2016, but that day of construction is coming. And this would be partially offset by the $3.8 million we will receive in federal funds to help support that first phase of construction.
Okay,
Yes,
the
sir.
Buck O'Neill Bridge will be
Yes.
done and reopened, but that's just kind of a
The work
temporary-
that they're doing right now is, intended to provide that bridge with 5 or so more years of useful life. That gives KCMO and MoDOT the time to do the engineering work for a new bridge that then would be constructed while Buck O'Neill remains open. So yes, at this point, we don't believe that our construction would overlap with construction on the Buck O'Neill Bridge.
We don't want both of them shut
No.
down.
All right, that concludes the community development projects that are listed. So at this point, I'll turn it over to the Fire Chief, Dave Hargis, to discuss projects budgeted under fire.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, I want to talk about a few of the things in our capital budget that I think you'll probably have some questions about. So, number one is our public safety drone. In 2016, we purchased a drone for use in the fire department and other city departments. What we purchased was a hobbyist drone. It was it's $1,500, seemed like a high price, but it's actually, as far as drones go, a very cheap model. We purchased that model to see how it was going to work out. Initially, we didn't anticipate it taking a year to get our certificate of waiver from the FAA to fly it legally. But we accomplished that. We began flying. We have, right now we have 4 trained pilots at the fire station. We've utilized it for the levee board and assistance with Pat to identify homeless camps along the Missouri River. We've done quite a bit of work with Kim and Sarah on projects, giving them a different view. We used it to do the fire investigation at the Armour and Swift fire. we were unable to utilize it during the fire because the winds that day exceeded the flight limits of our drone. So what we're proposing to do this year is to buy a more robust drone that is actually designed for fire, rescue, police operations. It's able to withstand harsher weather conditions, more wind speed, a little bit of moisture. It will be outfitted with a combination video and thermal camera, so whoever's piloting it can see a heat signature that's overlaid onto a video screen. That would have been helpful at the Armored Swift Fire. We could have identified hot spots. And we call this a public safety drone because we figured out at that fire also that when we have a large event like that, our personnel, we're using them all for fire operations. So what we're in the process of doing, and I know earlier this week we completed training of one police officer now has an FAA certification for drones. We're going to train the police department up with a number of pilots so that when we have a fire incident, they'll be able to use personnel to fly missions for us during the fire operation. And if we have, they have a police operation, they're looking for a suspect somewhere where we can use the thermal capabilities, we'll utilize one of our personnel to fly the drone for them so that we can cross-utilize it. We have the FAA COA for the entire city. We're going to get a cadre of pilots trained up in both departments so that any event that comes up, if we have any type of storms or anything here, we can use it to survey damage. There's just a lot of capabilities, and we've used it for a lot over the past couple of years. And I think probably some of you have seen some of the video and the photographs that we've taken with it. So, and that the cost of it, while it seems high, is actually kind of middle of the road for these types of drones. They get up into the $35,000 and $40,000 range. But we think, again, this is another step forward. If it proves itself, then maybe a few years down the road we might ask for something better. Or this might actually be what we need.
What are you going to do with the old one?
We're going to keep it as well so we have a kind of a redundancy.
Okay. We could use that for Snake Saturday.
We play with it a little?
We actually used it for Snake Saturday last year.
We did use it for Snake Saturday.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question. Does this, you keep talking about training, is there a cost to the training for the officers and for your department, and is that included in this?
That's not included. The cost, we do our own in-house training. The police department now, the individual that got certified as a drone pilot is also a private aircraft pilot, and then we have an individual in our department that he is air transport pilot qualified. He flies jets on his days off, and they can certify and do the training, and the cost for the license is like $5 through the FAA, so it's not a significant cost for the pilot training.
That's what I assumed. I assumed it was going to be in-house once they're trained, so just curious.
So are you having to call the FAA every time before you fly those out?
No, that's what our certificate of waiver
part of it,
allows
yeah.
us to fly it in the Class D airspace without notification. They set limits where if we go outside of those limits, we have to contact them, but most of the time we stay in those limits anyway.
What is the height limit?
It depends on where it's at in town. Over on the west side of Burlington, it's 200 feet, and then as you go west, it increases as the further away from we get away from the downtown airport, their approach paths.
So when the police use it, though, can you put little guns on it?
I'm not allowed to divulge that information in a public setting.
Little bitty ones.
Big guns.
Big guns.
Any other questions?
I think it's a good idea.
Next item, Dave.
The next item is a training facility feasibility study. Currently, we don't have a dedicated training facility within the city limits to do training at. We conduct a lot of our training of catching plugs and hose training on the side of the streets, which we're out in the traffic when we're doing that. We disrupt traffic sometime unintentionally. The water we throw sometimes creates a problem. We try not to. But what we would like to do this year is use this money to see if there's an area around the waste treatment plant that we can build a training facility. And this would be a multi-year project. This year would just be the feasibility study to see what footprint we could put down there. And then the next year would be building basically a big concrete pad where we could go down there and use the trucks without damaging the road And then the next year would be putting training facilities on there that the police and fire both could utilize for training.
So as you look in your CIP, that the 20,000 that Dave just talked about is for a feasibility study to see if it would work down in the PID. We have a number of questions about it. In the event that it would, then we're showing $750,000 in 2020. So just wanted to give you that heads up that this is about the feasibility of doing an expensive project in the following year.
So is there a cost benefit to this? I mean, we pay now to train someplace else? So at what point would we break even if we developed our own?
I don't think you could justify it in monetary terms. I think you'd have to determine what, well, it'd be very hard to estimate the value of the additional training that we would be able to receive by doing it here in town. It's just, yeah. It's got a value, but it was hard to quantify.
Okay, any other questions? The other thing we're going to talk about is bidirectional radio repeaters. This item has been in the budget since 2014, 2015. It was budgeted to correct radio signal deficiencies at Harrah's, the hospital, and the Cerner buildings. Previously, we've corrected everything at Harrah's. The hospital has all been corrected, and due to different factors, we'd had trouble getting things completed at Cerner. We've been meeting with them over the past several months. They're anticipating and getting it in their next budget because it's going to be rather expensive. I believe it's around $150,000, $170,000 for the equipment they need. So we've agreed to work with them. We've helped the other entities out with the same amount of money. So we're just rolling this over. They're giving us a scheduled plan to get it done. So that's why we're carrying this money over for another year.
Council have any other questions about any of the other items showing under fire? We think they're probably self-explanatory.
We didn't talk about the water softener.
We can if you like, sir. Okay. One other item that I'd just like to make note of, not showing here in the narrative section, but in the CIP, we are showing an engine replacement that's anticipated to be proposed in the 2020 budget in the amount of $670,000. So just again wanted to make you aware of that significant expenditure that's coming down the way.
What's that for?
That's, well, it's for one of the fire engines. Davey, do you want to? Yeah. Those.
I thought you said just an engine.
No. For a fire truck. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. All right, then, moving on to interdepartmental. I'd like to ask Stephen Roberts to come on out of his control room there and talk about the serving clustering software.
I think Stephen should be trained on how to operate that drone.
You're insinuating that I don't already know how to operate the drone. Thank you. The only capital item that I have this year is for $24,000 for clustering software. It's a Microsoft license to upgrade our servers from Enterprise Server to what's called Data Center Edition. And what that does is allow me to cluster our physical servers together to protect us in case one of our main systems that we have now has a catastrophic failure. One of the other systems will kick in and keep our infrastructure and our critical applications up and running. Obviously, the main benefit to this is reduced downtime, but also adds an additional layer of protection for our infrastructure, especially during off hours, weekends, holidays, when IT is on call and not actually at work. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Do we have an overnight monitoring system?
I have a number of monitoring systems, but they all kick off either emails or text to me.
To alerts?
Yeah.
Tell you something's wrong?
Correct.
All right. Thanks, Stephen. The other items, IT supplies and general liability insurance, you see every year in interdepartmental section of the gaming fund. I'll cover the next several departments, the items that are listed there, starting with library. As Vicki Lewis noted last week when the library budget was presented, the library is requesting that the gaming fund cover ductwork cleaning next year. They've been noticing that the heating and air conditioning ducts in the library are dirty and they're blowing black dust out, and so they have requested that expenditure, and that's been budgeted. The next item relates to Link City. It's actually an amount to balance the communications fund, which serves as a pass-through to cover any deficits that the city is required to cover that might occur with the Link City Fiber Network. Our agreement with the company, which now is known as NOCIX, N-O-C-I-X, used to be Data Shack, is that the city and NOCIX will share in any operating deficits for Link City up to a city cap of $150,000. So we do have some amounts for back years that are budgeted that we've been holding off on while we work through some other issues with NOCIX. And then we always budgeted the maximum amount in the coming year, although the deficits have not come close to approaching $300,000 a year, but just in case, we always budget that amount. So that's what's going on in that item. We did have a balance starting in the funds, which is why we don't have to budget more than $133,497. The next department's Parks and Recreation. Again, this was discussed some last week. The first amount being a transfer to Parks and Recreation Fund for general support. This is actually kind of a trade-off. The Parks and Recreation Fund does pay the general fund for services that the general fund provides to Parks and Recreation in the amount of $94,051. So then the gaming fund has been reimbursing the Parks and Recreation Fund for that transfer. Essentially, the gaming, in a sense, the gaming fund is paying the general fund for the costs to administrative costs of Parks and Recreation. The other item is a renovation to Diamond Number 1, which did get some discussion last week in the amount of $375,000. One question that I was asked to put to the school district as a result of last week's discussion was whether the school district would like to contribute an additional amount to that project in order to augment the improvement which is described here. I did put that question to the school superintendent and did hear back from him today, indicating that that is not something that the school district would be able to do. So the current proposal is that this would be funded out of the gaming fund just for the project that was described last week. Any questions? Okay. Police fire pension plan, that is actually an expenditure that's showing as zero next year, but I did just want to show it just to have it visible. So to the extent that there is some contribution necessary to shore up the balance in the police fire pension fund to ensure that we are fully covered in that fund and don't have any unfunded liability, then that transfer is typically made from the gaming fund. But this year, according to the actuary for the pension plan, no transfer should be necessary.
In fact, they're 102% funded.
Right. They're in good shape at the moment. And then now we're to the police department and some projects there, and I'll turn it over to Major Kevin Freeman to discuss those.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Many of these things on our project list this year are either replacement or continuation of projects that are already in place. So I'll go through them kind of quickly. Just please, if you have any questions at all, just stop me and we'll talk about it. But the electronic ticket riders is a project that we had originally budgeted for replacement schedule in 2021. In this fiscal year, we had money set aside as part of the public safety sales tax expansion for our new officers, which included 3 new handheld ticket riders for those 6 new officers that we're bringing back on board. When we went to bid those out with our current vendor, we realized that the machine that we're using now is no longer useful. They're working on an Android platform now, and we're using a Windows platform. So in order to bring the whole program up to the same operating consistency, we wanted to move this project up to this fiscal year and request some money for those ticket writers that will then make all of the ticket writers the same on the Android platform, and we're not supporting two platforms at the same time. Yes, sir.
Question, is there any worth to the old units?
Well, excuse me. No, there's not. I actually have one sitting on my desk right now. It's a nice paperweight.
Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah. We did inquire about trade-in value, and there just simply is none.
Okay.
What's the difference with just a handwriting a ticket and doing this? I mean, is it a time?
It's time and it's legibility to a degree sometimes. As you know, we're getting into a time where a lot of our officers coming on board have never had to write anything in their lives because they've always been on a computer. And the court was having a lot of problems when we first implemented this program. The court was having a lot of problems with reading the officers' writing on the tickets, and this has helped immensely. It automatically sends the tickets into the court system for processing, so it saves them time. And on the scene, if we're writing multiple tickets, instead of handwriting multiple tickets individually, we just click next, and it auto-populates all the information for the driver, and we just change the offense.
There you go.
Okay. The in-car camera replacement system. This is something that we look at doing just because of the technology, and it is a component in the car that's getting rattled around a lot. It tends to break. Every 5 to 6 years, we look to replace this. If you remember last year, we moved money out of our maintenance agreements into our equipment line because we decided not to renew the warranty on them because it was too cost prohibitive. So this is now bringing that back online to replace these in-car cameras, and then also to close the gap with the body cams that we purchased last year also, so we get those closer to being on the same schedule every 5 to 6 years, where we're replacing the entire system instead of body cameras 1 year and in cars the next year. So this is, we anticipate staying with the watch guard system because we're happy with it, and it's compatible with the body cams that we just purchased. Any questions on that? Okay. The additional external cameras, just adding to the project that's been a multi-year project to this point. We're going to add 2 cameras this year is the intention, to place one at Armour and Lynn. So we'll basically have end-to-end coverage of Armour Road from Burlington to basically Vernon at this point. That's using the 2 cameras at Taney. The second location, we talked about a couple different things. The highest likelihood right now that we'll probably put it on the southern side of Swift. We have a couple cameras on Swift right now, but we don't have anything that covers the south end of Swift. So, any questions on that? In-car computer replacement. This is, again, just one of those things that every 5 to 6 years, these in-car laptops, even though they're ruggedized and semi-ruggedized, they take a beating. They're being used 24 hours, 7 days a week, rattling around these cars. And Stephen and Chris are basically chasing their tail right now, trying to keep these things in service for us. So it's time to replace them, and this is the request to do so. Okay. Vehicles, not really anything to say there. It's just the typical replacement schedule that we have on our vehicles for this year. Roughly $124,000 to buy the vehicles and pay for the changeover, moving the equipment from one vehicle to the next. Okay. Then really last but not least, the public safety robot. Again, I'll kind of play off at Chief Hargis here. This is something that we would intend on using for multi-functions within the city, both police and fire. This is something that would be a resource that we would share with some of our neighbors north of the river on tactical operations and fire operations. It is a high dollar piece of equipment. It comes with a standard camera, an infrared camera, and a thermal camera, as well as two-way audio. It's something that in a tactical situation, we can put it into a house to move around to look to see where the threat is at, or if there still is a threat, without having to insert a person in there. So this is, we took this information, our friends at Kansas City just purchased a robot very similar to this, so that's where our numbers have come from. They have the experience with it. One of the benefits of this robot here is it's not tethered to communications, so it's wireless, so we can move it around. It has a greater capability, goes up and down stairs, and Major Bagley's here. He's a little bit more up to speed on the capabilities of it. If you have any questions about it, I'd call on him to answer it. But
will it have a good relationship with the drone?
we hope they play nice together.
You guys get all the fun toys.
I can't let it pass. Is it going to be armed?
It is not. It will not be armed.
What is the life expectancy on the robots? I know it says extended warranty, but I know it's computer, so.
You know, it's a hard question first to ask because it's something that we've never owned before. So again, we'll come back to Kansas City and how often they have to replace them. They have to replace their robots more from intentional damage than they do from wearing out. So I would anticipate this to be probably a 7 to 10 year cycle if it's not destroyed intentionally, which does happen, which is part of the warranty, part of inserting a piece of technology into an unsafe environment versus a person.
Okay, thank you.
And then let me go ahead and touch on the
Yeah, just a large expenditure that we're anticipating in 2020. Go ahead, Kevin.
So the police radio replacement, the current radio system that we're on now, we've been on for 10 years now. The metro area radio system, MARS is what it's referred to. Discussions are beginning to take place in the region of upgrading that system, and obviously when those start to happen, we need to stay involved in that, or we fall out of it, and then we're on our own, which is much more costly for us to build out our radio system versus being on the regional system. So this will be money that we anticipate as the region moves forward, that we'll continue to be in the game to replace our radios as they age and age out, basically. It includes the fire radios. It would include any public works radios that are on the system within the city. It's the entire project, and we just purchased the new radios for our new officers, and they were north of $4,000 per handheld radio, and so figure we have just us. We have 40 of those, and then the in-car radios, the fire department radios. So it's a pretty hefty project. We don't necessarily anticipate being it as costly as it was 10 years ago, just because a lot of that groundwork is laid with the dispatch infrastructure and the antennas and stuff like that within the region.
So again, that's not showing in 2019, it's showing in 2020, but that is about a $500,000 expenditure that we're expecting to be proposing in next year's budget. All right, moving on, the items that are listed on page 221 of your budget, designing engineering for miscellaneous public works projects is one that we have in there every year. It's just an as necessary amount. Water treatment plant rehabilitation, you're of course aware of that project. We are finishing up design now. I think we're probably at around 65% or so, and anticipate that construction will begin next year. We've got approximately half of the amount for construction budgeted in next year's budget, and then we would bring you, we would expect the other part of that in the amount of around $6 million in 2020, and that would complete the project. Lastly, we always have a contingency amount as well in gaming for unanticipated expenses that might occur. We do get the mayor's approval before we would tap that, and then bring it to you after the fact. All right. Moving on then to the Northgate Fund, the top of page 222. So as you know, in 1999, the city undertook the redevelopment of the area that was covered by the Northgate Village apartments, which had been raised by the city, and the new development is also called Northgate and includes apartments, single-family homes, senior housing, and some retail. We are continuing to work on redevelopment of that area, and the gaming fund served as a special allocation fund for tax increment financing, so the gaming fund is repaid in an amount annually from TIF revenues that come in. The amount that we budget is the amount that's necessary to complete the infrastructure to the area. Whenever that additional area is developed, the city has a responsibility for the infrastructure. So we do budget the entire amount that is anticipated. We are looking at change in terms of Northgate. So this may look very different next year, but for right now, we budgeted it the way that that we always have. All right. The next items from the Parks and Recreation Fund. These were covered last week. These funds were allocated by the Parks Board and are coming out of their Parks and Recreation Fund. But we do list them in this document just for the sake of completeness. So with that, we'll move on to the Transportation Fund, and I'll ask Pat to address those projects.
Thank you. The Northgate Alley repairs. The concrete alleys within the Northgate area that were built in beginning in 2003 do not drain well, and all winter long, when it snows, any precipitation ice, it melts and it just holds the salt in with it on that concrete, and it's just deteriorated quite a bit. So this is going to be a multi-year, 3-year repair project at right now $50,000 for year one. And the reason we're doing that is to keep the disruption of the residents down. I don't think they'd like the entire area done in 1 year. And so we're going $50,000, see how far we get with that. The installation of slot drains, because it's an inverted crown, we've done that in the past and been successful, so we plan on doing that this year.
Do you know if you need to change any of the slope for the drainage, or just inserting the slot?
Yeah, there's going to be some, complete removal and replacement of concrete areas. Yeah, because they're just.
So it looks like some places don't really slope like they should.
That's right. And we're going to extend some storm sewer pipes.
Okay. Thank you.
The next item is street drainage repair project at 1100 block of Gentry. Over the years, the area doesn't drain at all, really, and because over the years there have been so many overlays, and they weren't mills and overlays, they were just overlays, so there's no more curb left. And we thought that's a really bad deal. I went to the road district and talked to them about that, but they agreed that's more of a drainage problem, so it's on the list this year. And a related item is the following one. It's the same kind of deal. It just doesn't drain at on West 12th Avenue, just west of Burlington. Those will be bid together and make some good drainage improvements.
The other projects we listed in transportation are either ones that we bring to you every year, such as curb, sidewalk, and drainage improvements throughout the city, or projects which just seem kind of self-explanatory. So unless you had any specific questions about any of the others that are listed under the Transportation Fund, we thought we'd move on to water. Okay. Pat, will you continue with the Water Fund?
Yeah, Water Fund, GIS updates. The city maintains a geographic information system of data that provides mapping, analysis, and field data used primarily for public works and community development, but also for other city staff. This project is an update of the shape files that form the primary basis of the city's GIS system. This information was last updated in 2013.
tell me when you want me to start talking.
I will. So actually, this project at $40,000 was supposed to be phase 2. Last year in the gaming fund, a project for phase 1 of updates to GIS was included, but it didn't get encumbered. We just didn't get an RFP out in time for that. So we intend to come back, I think, this year, sometime soon, probably, for a budget amendment to reestablish the 60,000 from last year, and we could do phase 1 and phase 2 this year.
This is similar to the wayfinding signage, and the RFP just didn't get out soon enough. The phase 1 GIS updates would include our aerial photography and the planimetric data that we use on a pretty much a daily basis that has all of our curbs, all of our sidewalks, just a lot of the basic data that we use for a lot of the maps we make. And it hasn't been updated since 2013, and we've had a lot of development since 2013, so we'd like to get that updated.
The next item is water treatment plant maintenance shop remodel project, $40,000. So last year we budgeted $75,000 for this project, and it's to make improvements to the break room and locker room and restrooms, and those improvements are needed. Once we got a design from an architect submitted, he gave a budget estimate of more than $75,000. So we're looking for adding $40,000 to that budget, and we can move forward with it. That a resolution with a contract is actually going to be at the next council meeting after.
Which one is that, Pat?
We're talking about water plant maintenance shop project, I'm sorry.
So
The one that's
226.
40,000.
Oh, water treatment plant maintenance.
Right.
Okay.
40,000.
So the shop improvements, we're going over budget, so we're asking for 40,000 additional funding in the 2019 budget. We plan to start it right away. We've already got a contractor, a low bid, and we're going to have approval of a contract at the next council meeting, and then we can move forward at October 1st.
So the way we have this on your next council agenda is we have approval of the budget scheduled, and then assuming that you approve the budget including this project, then the next item is going to be award a contract in the total amount of $115,000 using the funding from fiscal year 2018 plus the funding from fiscal year 2019.
Okay, so the water plant maintenance and repairs of $30,000, that's a standing line item and has nothing to do with your water treatment plant
That's correct.
shop remodel project.
That is correct.
And you may or may not use that $30,000.
Correct.
Okay, and the tuck pointing is its own standalone expense
Correct.
as well. Okay, I just want to make sure I understand
That's right.
what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay, dropping down.
Well, hold on, just the other items again in water, either were, replacement of existing equipment or kind of standard items that we do bring you. For example, well cleaning and maintenance, water plant maintenance and repairs. So unless you had any specific questions about those, Pat will move on to
On the
WPP.
on the valve exercising, are we doing that now? I mean, did we buy a machine to do that with? Or?
Yes, we have a valve exercising machine. It's a $40,000 machine we bought years ago, but we have been slow in implementing this program. This year, we didn't get as far. We did a lot. We did several. But we didn't get it completed because we've been pretty much we've got two open positions on and off all year. And so we finally have got those filled, and when we have full staff, we'll have a lot more time to do this project. The next one that I was going to cover is water. Let's see, is in the WPC fund, which is repair pump at Bedford Pump Station. And pump number one at the Bedford Pump Station has electrical problems, which causes breakers to trip frequently. The pump has been evaluated by an engineer who has determined the motor is wound too tight, which overloads the motor and causes fuses to blow. This project will address that issue. Redevelopment landfill monitoring wells.
Can we back up just a
Yeah,
little bit?
sure.
Back on 225, that pump station maintenance, you say the Sunny Hills and the Furnace Street are essential water service to the hospital. We don't want to lose water up there again. I mean, is this?
Yeah, those.
What do we have to do?
This is just to make sure we're maintaining them properly. So it's really fairly standard maintenance. We don't see a major project as being necessary, but we need to keep maintaining those pump stations.
They're not near as large as the stormwater pump stations, for sure.
If we let them run out of water again, I think we're all dead.
We did you'll recall, we did accomplish the new interconnection with Kansas City Water up on Vernon to address that specific issue.
Yeah.
We have triple redundancy up there now.
Good.
The next item is to redevelop landfill monitoring wells. In 1987, the city closed and capped a sewage treatment sludge landfill it operated. Since then, the site has been monitored to determine the amount of contaminants discharged into the Missouri River. Earlier this year, the Department of Natural Resources required the city to take certain measures for the 5-year extension of the state operating permit, which will include, these are measures that we don't have any choice but to go forward with, redevelopment of 7 existing monitoring wells, installation of 2 new monitoring wells, upgradient from the site, so we're not only rebuilding our existing ones, they want us to build 2 more. And third, have a survey performed to determine the elevations at the top of the monitoring wells. So this funding will be enough to take care of those items, and we'll move on. SCADA control additions at a pump station. The installation of state equipment at the Atlantic Erie and Burlington pump stations will include an auto dialer to add additional input and output to the motor control center. This will also provide high water alarms to the computer at water treatment plant, and it can do it on cell phones too. Most importantly, personnel will be able to activate pumps at one at a time, pumps, which rather than activate 2 by the other way we did it sometimes, which will avoid costly electrical surges. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but we get hit by power and light based on the biggest surge of the year, and that's our base cost. And that's all I have.
I just, what does SCAD stand for?
Pardon me?
What does the SCAD stand for?
SCADA. What does it stand for?
Oh. Stephen, where are you? It's, I used to know it.
It refers to a computer system that monitors both the water and the sewer systems to determine that there are no issues going on, and if they are, alert us to them.
I believe it stands for Security, Control, and Data Acquisition.
Security, control, and data
Supervisory.
acquisition. Thank you, Stephen.
Supervisory control. I Googled it.
Supervisory.
Yes.
Since we're on pump station, how's the work doing on the 26th Street station?
How's that going?
Pardon me.
The other pump
The
station.
work repairing the 26th Avenue pump.
Oh, it's going well. Today they're attaching the brickwork's up on the walls. They're attaching a roof to it, which is a very, very essential part. And they expect to be done maybe by Friday. And then they'll cure, they have to wait 7 days to cure the concrete. But we've been checking the river stages, and we're no longer needing to pump, it looks like, for the duration of the project. Good.
So there's going to be no expense related to that we know of anyway in 2019, related to that project?
No. I mean, and we hope and expect to be reimbursed for all the costs that are being spent on this. You did make one budget amendment last week to cover the immediate cost, but we expect full reimbursement.
And there will be a barricade built to protect that thing in the future.
Yeah, we're going to do some heavy-duty bollards is what we're planning on inside of the fence, the security fence, and it'll be hopefully something similar to the children's fountain bollards they have there.
Not similar to what we have in the other development region on the. So I wouldn't recommend those, that's all I'm saying.
That concludes our presentation of capital projects tonight. Are there any other questions about capital projects or any aspect of the proposed fiscal year 2019 budget that we can answer?
Making a lot of great progress, so.
Good job.
I have one change down that you all directed tonight, and that is to move the 16th Avenue Bicycle Lanes project from 2020 to 2019. So with that, we've got two changes that you've given us, one last week, one this week. Nothing else that I'm aware of. Is that correct? All right, this will be on your budget a week from tomorrow for your approval for the next fiscal year. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Yeah, all in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Forgot, I was just about to walk
Already.
out.